Someone butchered 6 people with a mattock, then lived in their house for 3 days, fed the animals, cooked meals in the kitchen, slept in the beds, while a 7-year-old girl slowly died in the barn. This is Hinterkaifeck, March 31st, 1922, a small farmstead in Bavaria. And by the end of this investigation, you'll understand why this case has haunted detectives for over a century. Because the family knew something was wrong days before they died. Andreas Gruber was 63 years old, a widower, a farmer who'd worked the same land for decades. His daughter, Cecilia, lived with him, along with her 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. Cecilia's husband had died in World War I. The family was isolated, living on a farmstead called Hinterkaifeck, about 70 kilometers north of Munich. The name literally means behind Kaifeck. The nearest village was a kilometer away, through the woods. They'd just hired a new maid, Maria Baumgartner, 44 years old. She arrived on March 31st, the day of the murders, her first day of work. The previous maid had quit 6 months earlier. She told people the house was haunted. She heard footsteps in the attic at night. Andreas Gruber had laughed it off. But a few days before the murders, something changed. Andreas found footprints in the snow, leading from the forest edge to the house, but no footprints leading back. Think about that for a second. Someone walked to the house, but never left. He told his neighbors he'd heard footsteps in the attic, found a strange newspaper on the property, one he didn't subscribe to. His house keys went missing, then mysteriously reappeared. The neighbors asked if he'd reported it to police. Andreas said no. He'd handle it himself. Drop a comment if you think he made the right call. On March 31st, the new maid Maria arrived by train. A neighbor saw her walking toward Hinterkaifeck around 9 a.m. No one saw her alive again. For 3 days, life at Hinterkaifeck appeared normal from the outside. Smoke rose from the chimney. The animals were fed. Neighbors saw lights moving through the house at night. But on April 4th, young Cecilia didn't show up to school. The teacher sent a note home. No response. Mail piled up at the door. The neighbors grew concerned. On April 4th, a group of men from the village walked to Hinterkaifeck to check on the family. What they found in the barn would become one of the most disturbing crime scenes in German history. The barn door was unlocked. Inside, they found 4 bodies stacked like firewood. Andreas Gruber, his daughter, Cecilia, her daughter, 7-year-old Cecilia, and her son, 2-year-old Joseph. All 4 had been killed with a mattock, a farming tool similar to a pickaxe. The autopsy revealed the blows were delivered with extreme force, skulls shattered, faces destroyed beyond recognition. But here's what made investigators stop cold. Young Cecilia, the 7-year-old, had torn out clumps of her own hair. Strands were still clenched in her fists. She had survived for hours after the attack, lying in the barn, in the dark, listening to her family die around her. Police searched the house next. In one bedroom, they found the maid, Maria Baumgartner. In another, they found the youngest child, Joseph. Both killed the same way. Blunt force trauma to the skull. The murder weapon, the mattock, was found in the barn. It belonged to the Gruber family. 6 people dead, murdered in their own home, with their own tool. But here's where this case becomes something else entirely. The police reconstructed what happened that night, and what they discovered was methodical, calculated, almost surgical in its execution. The murders happened on March 31st, likely between 7 and 9 p.m. The family had been lured to the barn one by one. Andreas first, then his daughter Cecilia, then young Cecilia, and finally, 2-year-old Josef. The killer had waited in the shadows of the barn, ambushing each family member as they entered, one by one. Each victim likely unaware of what had happened to the previous one. Then the killer walked into the house and murdered the maid, Maria, in her bedroom. She'd been at Hinterkaifeck for less than 12 hours. And then something happened that defies explanation. The killer stayed. For 3 days, someone lived in that house with 6 corpses on the property. Police found evidence everywhere. Meals had been cooked in the kitchen, fresh bread baked, food eaten at the family table. The animals had been fed and watered, the cows milked, the chickens fed, the pigs tended to. This wasn't the work of a drifter. It was someone who understood farm routines. Neighbors reported smoke rising from the chimney each evening, lights moving through the house at night, curtains opening, then closing again. One neighbor even claimed he saw a figure in the window, standing perfectly still, watching him. What kind of person does that? Kills 6 people and then just lives there? The killer slept in the beds, used the family's belongings, sat in their chairs. All while young Cecilia slowly died in the barn just meters away. The investigation was a disaster from the start. This was 1922. Forensic science barely existed. The crime scene was trampled by villagers before police even arrived. The bodies were moved, evidence contaminated. Fingerprinting wasn't standard practice yet. But even for 1922, the mistakes were staggering. Police never secured the farmhouse. Journalists walked through the crime scene taking photographs. Souvenir hunters took items from the property, tools, clothing, even pieces of furniture. The murder weapon, the mattock, was handled by multiple people before it was logged as evidence. Any fingerprints were wiped away. And then police made a decision that would haunt the investigation forever. They decapitated the bodies. All 6 victims had their heads removed and sent to Munich for examination. Investigators hoped to use a new technique called phrenology, studying skull shape to determine personality traits. It was pseudoscience, complete nonsense. But in 1922, they were desperate. The heads were never returned. They were stored in jars in the basement of Munich police headquarters for decades, until they vanished during the bombing raids of World War II. By then, the investigation had collapsed. Police interviewed over 100 suspects, all cleared. The case went cold. For decades. But in the 1950s, a German journalist reopened the files, and he found something the original investigators had completely missed. Behind the barn was a small tool shed, barely larger than a closet. Inside, investigators found something strange. A hole cut into the wooden wall at eye level. It faced directly toward the house. Someone had been watching the family for days, maybe weeks. The footprints Andreas found in the snow, the missing keys, the strange newspaper, the sounds in the attic. It wasn't paranoia. Someone had been stalking them. And when the previous maid quit, the one who said the house was haunted, she wasn't imagining things. Someone had been living in that attic. The police had a long list. Over 100 people interviewed, dozens considered serious suspects. But 3 names kept coming up. Suspect number 1, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He was a neighbor, a farmer, and he had a secret connection to the Gruber family that made him the prime suspect for decades. Lorenz had been having an affair with Cecilia, Andreas's daughter, and there were rumors that 2-year-old Josef was actually Lorenz's son, not her dead husband's. Cecilia had filed a paternity suit. She wanted financial support for Joseph. Lorenz refused. The case was scheduled to go to court. Then the murders happened, and the case died with her. Lorenz was also one of the first people to enter the crime scene. He was part of the group that discovered the bodies on April 4th. And this is where things got strange. When they found the bodies in the barn, Lorenz immediately moved them, pulled them apart, handled them, contaminated everything. The others said he seemed unusually calm, almost like he already knew what he was going to find. And then came his behavior afterward. Lorenz took over the farm, fed the animals, acted like he owned the place. Police interrogated him multiple times. His alibi was weak. He claimed he was home alone the night of the murders. No one could verify it. But they couldn't prove he did it either. And eventually, they let him go. Suspect number 2, Carl Gabriel. A drifter, a mechanic, seen in the area around the time of the murders. Carl had a history of violence, arrested multiple times for assault. He fit the profile, someone capable of extreme brutality, who could vanish without a trace. Witnesses placed him near Hinterkaifeck on March 30th, asking for work, but nobody hired him. After the murders, Carl disappeared. Police searched for months. They eventually found him living under a false name in another region of Germany. He admitted he'd been in the area, but claimed he left before the murders happened. His alibi was flimsy, full of holes. But the biggest problem? The killer stayed on the farm for 3 days, feeding animals, milking cows, handling farm routines. Carl was a drifter. He didn't know farming. He wouldn't have known how to take care of livestock. Eventually, police ruled him out. Suspect number 3, Andreas Gruber himself. Yes, some investigators believed Andreas might have murdered his own family before turning the weapon on himself. The theory went like this. Andreas was having an incestuous relationship with his daughter, Cecilia. Rumors spread through the village for years. Some believed young Joseph wasn't Lorenz's child, but Andreas's, his grandson, and his son. If the paternity case went to court, the truth might come out. The scandal would destroy him. So he killed everyone, his daughter, his grandchildren, the maid, and then himself. But there was one problem, a massive one. Andreas's skull was shattered from behind. The angle made it physically impossible for him to have done it. And remember, someone lived in that house for 3 days afterward. Andreas was already dead. Police abandoned the theory. Drop a comment with your theory. Who do you think did it? By 1923, the investigation had stalled completely. No arrests, no convictions, no answers. The case was officially closed in 1955, unsolved. But in 2007, something happened. Something that reopened old wounds. A team of German criminology students reinvestigated the case using modern forensic techniques. They built a 3D model of the crime scene, analyzed blood spatter patterns, reconstructed the timeline down to the minute. And they discovered something that changed everything. The killer wasn't a stranger, wasn't a drifter, wasn't someone passing through. The killer knew the family intimately, knew their routines, knew the layout of the farm, knew how to care for the animals. And the students believed. They knew exactly who it was. In 2007, the criminology students presented their findings, and their conclusion pointed to one person: Lorenz Schlittenbauer. But not for the reasons the original investigators suspected. They discovered something buried deep in the old police files, a single witness statement, overlooked for 85 years. A neighbor reported seeing Lorenz near the Gruber farm on the evening of March 31st, around 7 p.m., the exact window when the murders likely occurred. Lorenz had always claimed he was home that night, alone, no alibi. But this witness placed him at the scene. Next, the students analyzed the original crime scene photographs using modern forensic software. They measured the angles of the wounds, the force required, the height and positioning of the attacker. Their conclusion? The killer was approximately 5'8", right-handed, physically strong. Lorenz Schlittenbauer was 5'8", right-handed, and a farmer, strong from years of manual labor. But the most damning evidence was his behavior. Remember how Lorenz was the first to enter the barn? How he immediately started moving the bodies, pulling them apart, touching everything. The students believed he wasn't helping. He was destroying evidence, removing something before police could see it. And then came the part that chilled them. Those 3 days after the murders. Smoke from the chimney. Animals fed. Lights moving through the house. Curtains opening and closing. The students theorized that Lorenz didn't take over the farm after the murders. He was the one living there during those 3 days. Think about it. He knew the farm intimately. He'd been having an affair with Cecilia for years. He knew the routines. He knew how to care for the livestock. And he had motive. The paternity suit was about to expose him, ruin his reputation, force him to pay child support he couldn't afford. So he killed them, all of them. And then he stayed, sleeping in the beds, feeding the animals, eating their food. Why? The students believed he was waiting, making sure no one discovered the bodies too soon, buying time to establish an alibi. He kept the smoke rising from the chimney, so neighbors wouldn't get suspicious. And when enough time had passed, he discovered the bodies with the other villagers. The students took their findings to German authorities. But there was a problem, a big one. Lorenz Schlittenbauer had died in 1941, almost 70 years earlier. He was never charged, never arrested, never faced justice. Even with all the new research, there wasn't enough physical evidence to officially close the case. It remains unsolved. If you're still with me, subscribe. We dive deep into cases like this every week. But here's where the story gets even stranger. In 2010, a German journalist began tracking down Lorenz's descendants, his children, his grandchildren, asking questions, digging into family history. And one of them, Lorenz's grandson, said something chilling. He claimed his grandfather had confessed on his deathbed. In 1941, as Lorenz lay dying, he allegedly told his son, "I did something terrible at Hinterkaifeck. God will judge me." The son never reported it. He kept the secret for decades. And by the time the grandson came forward, it was too late to verify anything. No recording, no written confession, just a family story, passed down through generations. German authorities investigated the claim, but without physical evidence, they couldn't reopen the case. So the question remains, did Lorenz Schlittenbauer murder 6 people and get away with it? Or is there another explanation? The Hinterkaifeck farmhouse stood empty for over a year after the murders. No one wanted to live there. No one wanted to buy it. The land itself felt cursed. In 1923, the property was finally demolished. Every building torn down, every piece of wood burned. The locals wanted to erase it from existence. Today, nothing remains, just an empty field in the Bavarian countryside. A small memorial stone marks where the farm once stood. But the story of Hinterkaifeck refuses to die. It's become one of Germany's most famous unsolved cases. Books written, documentaries filmed, podcasts recorded. And every few years, someone new claims to have solved it. In 2016, a forensic psychologist proposed a different theory. He believed the killer was a World War I veteran suffering from what we now call PTSD, someone traumatized by the war who snapped. The brutality of the murders, the repeated blows, even after death, matched the profile of someone in a dissociative state. But critics pointed out a problem, a big one. The 3-day occupation, the calm, methodical care of the animals. That doesn't fit someone in a psychotic break. Then, in 2019, a German true crime author suggested the killer might have been a woman. Someone close to the family. Someone who knew their routines. Someone who could move through the house without raising suspicion. The theory pointed to a relative, possibly Victoria's sister, who may have had an inheritance motive. But again, no evidence. Just speculation. So what really happened at Hinterkaifeck? Here's what we know for certain. 6 people were murdered with extreme brutality on March 31st, 1922. The killer stayed in the house for 3 days afterward. The case was never solved. Here's what we can reasonably infer. The killer knew the family, knew the farm, had access without raising suspicion. The motive was likely personal, revenge, jealousy, or covering up a secret. And the killer probably lived nearby, someone the police interviewed, maybe even someone they suspected, but couldn't prove. Lorenz Schlittenbauer remains the most compelling suspect. The circumstantial evidence is strong. The deathbed confession, if true, is damning. But we'll never know for sure. The physical evidence is gone. The witnesses are dead. The case file's incomplete. Hinterkaifeck will remain one of history's darkest mysteries. But here's what makes this case truly haunting. It's not just the brutality. It's not just the fact that it's unsolved. It's the 3 days. Imagine the killer, sitting in that house, eating meals at the same table where the family once sat, sleeping in their beds, feeding their animals, while 6 bodies lay in the barn, slowly decomposing. What kind of person does that? What kind of mind can commit such violence, and then just exist in that space? That's the question that keeps this case alive. Not just who did it, but why did they stay? Drop your theory in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into history's darkest unsolved mysteries, subscribe. We cover cases like this every week. Thanks for watching. And remember, some mysteries are never meant to be solved.